His entire life was a journey. He traveled north and south, east and west. He traveled around the Sea of Galilee, along the Jordan River. He traveled along goat paths and up on mountain trails, through city streets and on gravel roads. He would preach on a hillside or use a boat for a pulpit. He would go to synagogues and be guest preacher for a Sabbath. He'd preach up at the temple, and along the way he would meet people, all kinds of people, friends and foes, believers and unbelievers, the penitent and the impenitent, tax collectors and Pharisees. Sometimes he'd travel all alone, off by himself, and sometimes he'd travel with large groups of people. But at each place, at every moment, in every spot, on every occasion, Jesus found himself at a crossroads. How would he carry out his Father's will at that place or in that spot? How would he advance his Father's eternal plan of salvation on this occasion or in that moment? What would he do when he was all alone with this person, or if other people were watching? Or what would he say when he was all alone with that person, or if other people were listening? Because what he would do and what he would say would sometimes endear himself to people, but oftentimes it would alienate himself from people. Each place, each moment, every spot, every occasion, Jesus was at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. But more and more at these crossroads, Jesus would also find himself in the crosshairs of an enemy. Opponents who didn't like him, dare I say, hated him. People would try to trap him, trip him up, take him down. And it was getting dangerous, because it really was true that it was better that one die for the people than the entire nation perish. And so they were looking for opportunities to kill him. His enemies were the religious leaders of all people. And so as we walk these crossroads tonight on Maundy, Thursday, and as we travel them again tomorrow on Good Friday, we're going to see Jesus in the crosshairs of quite a number of people. But on Easter Sunday, if we stick with it and we travel those crossroads, we are the ones who are going to be in the crosshairs for an entirely different reason, a good one. It's Thursday morning of Holy Week. Jesus and his disciples had spent the night, Wednesday night, outside the city where it was safe. Maybe in the Garden of Gethsemane, perhaps a little higher up on the Mount of Olives, possibly a couple miles to the east in the town of Bethany. Either way, it's Thursday morning and time is running short. Time is running out. The Passover needed to be celebrated later that evening, and preparations still needed to be made. They needed to find a lamb without blemish or defect. They needed herbs, bitter herbs, to celebrate the Passover. They needed bread, unleavened bread. They needed wine, grape wine, and they needed a room. They needed a place, a space to celebrate this Passover, one that would be big enough for all of them, but also private, a place where there wouldn't be interruptions, distractions, or enemies. They needed to be able to celebrate the Passover. They needed to be able to look back and thank God for the miraculous way that he had delivered his people from slavery in Egypt. And they needed to look ahead to the miraculous, the gracious way that he would deliver his people from their slavery to sin. Celebration. So Peter and John went. They went into the city on what we might call a covert operation, an undercover mission to find this place where they could celebrate the Passover. And they made sure they weren't followed, made sure they were discreet as they went about finding this undisclosed location. And they found the point man in the operation, the man carrying a jar of water. That's something the women would have normally done. And this man discreetly led them to this room upstairs off of street level where no one would look in and see what's going on or who's in there, and where the disciples wouldn't get distracted later on that night, and where enemies wouldn't appear. And this upper room was large enough for them, and it was already furnished, and it had everything they needed to make the preparations for the Passover. So Jesus and his disciples went there later that evening to celebrate, but not so much the Passover, because the Passover's time had come and gone. The Passover was suddenly obsolete. It was no longer necessary. It had served its purpose because the Passover lamb was there. And so Jesus said, "Here, take this. This is my body. Here, take this. This is my blood." A new meal, a new supper. The Lord's Supper, Holy Communion, a sacrament, a celebration, corporately, but also personally. Together, and yet individually. And that night in that room, Jesus would say to his disciples, "This is for you. It's for the forgiveness of sins." Celebration indeed, one we are privileged to enjoy this evening. As Jesus comes to you and to me corporately, and yet also individually, to say, "I love you. I died for you. Here, take this. This is my body, sacrificed for you, for the forgiveness of sins, to pay for every one of them. Here, take this, drink it. It's my blood shed for you to wash away all of your sins." Intimate for just a moment, you and Jesus and his love and his forgiveness. And yet, in that upper room on that night, in that meal, during that celebration, surrounded by his disciples, his students, his friends, surrounded by those who had followed him and those who listened to him and those who loved him, surrounded by those who believed in him and trusted him and knew who he was. There in that room there was an enemy, a traitor, a foe, the one who was eating with them, breaking bread with them, the one who was dipping his hand in the dish with him, the one who would go out that night, the one whom Satan would fill that night. That one, Judas, one of the 12, had Jesus in his crosshairs, this would be an inside job. A reading from Mark 14. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went into the city, and found everything just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They were all saddened, and one by one they said to him, "Surely you don't mean me?" "It is one of the 12, he replied, "one who dips bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go, just as it is written about him, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. The word of the Lord. They left the upper room on foot. They didn't have far to go, a mile perhaps at most. They would need to weave through the streets of Jerusalem toward one of the gates on the eastern wall of town, and then they would cross over the Kidron Valley, ascend the Mount of Olives a little higher, but stop short at this quiet place, this garden called Gethsemane. It was late, but it was light. The full moon made sure of that. But along the way, Jesus had many crossroads which he could have turned back and turned around and not gone through with any of this, let alone get to the garden. But none greater crossroad than the one he would experience when he and Peter and James and John went further into that garden, and when he would go a stone's throw even deeper into that garden. A chance to turn back? Would he do it? Would he drink it? That cup of suffering, that our sin, that we had poured for him. He went there to this garden, to this quiet place to contemplate, to agonize, to sweat, to wrestle, to pray. If ever there were a day of trouble, to call on the Lord. If ever there was an anxiety, to cast on him, none greater than right now. Father, all things are possible. If there's any other way to save the world, if you can take this cup from me, by all means do. But if not, not my will, but yours be done. Where's your garden? Where do you go to contemplate? What's your quiet place to be alone with God in prayer, to wrestle, to struggle, agonize, even sweat at any one of the crossroads that you find yourself at in life? Where is it that you go to call upon the Lord in that day of trouble? And what anxieties are you casting on him when you do? Either way, what a privilege. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer, because he listens and he answers, because he loves. So you go with confidence in prayer to him, any petition according to his will. And yet, in these crossroads, Jesus once again found himself in the crosshairs. No, there were no snipers on any of the rooftops, any of the buildings in the city of Jerusalem as he's winding his way through the streets. There were no sharpshooters positioned, stationed at any point along that eastern wall looking down at him as he traveled through the Kidron Valley. No one lying in wait in ambush behind some bush or up in some olive tree in the garden. No infrared laser, no night vision goggles, not because the moon was so bright, but because Judas knew where they were going to be. Judas knew exactly where they were going to be because he'd been there before. Then as one of the 12, but now as an agent of Satan. And he wasn't going to be coming alone. They were coming. A crowd of men armed with clubs and swords, with nothing but spite and hate in their hearts, sent by the religious leaders who had Jesus that night in their crosshairs. A reading from Mark chapter 14. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you'll not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough, the hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." The word of the Lord. The final crossroads that we consider this evening would prove to be a real traffic jam, so to speak. Jesus had determined that he would indeed drink that cup of suffering. So he stood up in that garden with all the resolve, determination, devotion, dedication to do exactly that. He woke his disciples up. They shook off their sleep. And as they did, they turned and saw a crowd of men walking directly toward them from the other side of the garden. Don't know what was more surprising, that these men had clubs and swords, or if they were being led by one of their own, Judas. Within moments, they had surrounded Jesus. Certainly, he was in their crosshairs. This time at point-blank range. Close enough for a kiss. They had their man. They bound him hand and foot, and they led him away. This would be the very last time those 12 disciples would ever be together. Judas would choose his own path. He would go his own way. And all the disciples would flee in fear. A final reading from Mark 14. Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. Then everyone deserted him and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind.